Hello everyone. This is our video lecture about the nervous system. You're going to want to have your notes handout available so you can fill in the blanks as we go along. You'll also want to jot down any questions you have. Maybe everything isn't perfectly clear. And since we're not doing this in person, if you have a question, you're going to have to write it down and ask me about it when we debrief this uh, at our next meeting. All right, so let's get started. This is a diagram of your central nervous system. Um, let's get a pointer. So the central nervous system can basically be divided into two main components, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system comprises your brain and your spinal cord right here. And then the peripheral nervous system is kind of everything else, anything that doesn't fall into the central nervous system. All right, we're going to talk about each of those in turn. So we're going to start with the central nervous system organization. All right, here we go. So this is a diagram of a brain. It's a side view. So if you were looking at the person, that person's ear would be here, and their eyes are up here to orient you. So you're looking at someone's brain from the side, and you can see that we can break down or divide the brain into components. So here's the forebrain, and that is this section here. That's made up of the cerebrum, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. And you're going to want to add these labels to the diagram in your notes. The cerebrum is this section here. It's the forward portion of this thing called the cerebral cortex, which actually is the kind of outer layer of the whole brain. It's kind of this yellowish section. That's all cerebral cortex. And specifically, the cerebrum is this section up here. The thalamus is here. It's located underneath the cerebral cortex. And the hypothalamus is right here below that. Um, At the end of the hypothalamus is a section called the pituitary gland that secretes lots of different hormones. And we'll be coming back to that in a later unit when we learn about the endocrine system. Um, Beneath the thalamus and the hypothalamus is the midbrain, and it basically acts as a connector between the forebrain and the hindbrain. Um, and then the hindbrain consists of the pons, which is this section right here, the medulla oblongata, which is this top, just the very top portion of what will become the spinal cord, and then the cerebellum in the back of the brain. This is the part of your brain that controls and coordinates your movements. And then, of course, we have the spinal cord here coming out the bottom. All right, so you want to make sure you have those labels on the first diagram in your notes. Here's the second diagram in your notes. So again, here on this side, we have another side view or a sagittal view of the brain. But here on the left is a front view, actually a rear view of the brain. So this is the back of someone's head, and you can divide the brain into two hemispheres, a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And if you do that by sort of dividing it right down the middle. Um, and the interesting and useful structure that connects these two hemispheres is called the corpus callosum. It's a really important structure in your brain that allows the two hemispheres to communicate with each other. Really important. Okay, so this time, we're gonna break up the brain into lobes. So the first lobe that we'll talk about is the frontal lobe, and that is right here. It's this section of the brain here, and it is associated with things like speech, so and motor control and frontal association. What do I mean by that? Well, all right. So association means pulling things together. So frontal association really means higher order thinking. All right, which we're always trying to get students to do. Um, Speech, this means the control of the muscles that and the decisions required to produce speech. So the creation of speech, both the thought process for it and some of the motor control of it. And what do I mean when I say motor? That means movement. So the motor control means control of the muscles. The motor cortex is the part of the brain that makes decisions about and instigates muscle movement. So that's what motor cortex here in the frontal lobe means. In the parietal lobe, this section right here, that's associated with senses of taste um, and with um, understanding speech. So we had this control of producing speech here. We've got understanding speech here in the parietal lobe. And also reading, so decoding text is in the parietal lobe. In the temporal lobe, this is that section down here, you have the sense of smell or olfaction. That's another sort of more biological term for the sense of smell. You have auditory association and you have hearing. So hearing, I think that's pretty straightforward. That's decoding sounds that come in from your ears. But auditory association means the way your brain builds a mental map of the world based on sound. That's what auditory association means. So you're putting together an internal picture of your world based on what you hear. That's auditory association. And then in the back here we have the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is associated with vision. So decoding images that you get from your eyes and figuring out what they mean, and also visual association. So building your internal representation of the world um, based on what you see. So you want to have these the terms in black and the terms in red on your notes. All right, so we're going to move on to talking about the organization of the peripheral nervous system. We're going to divide, that's my dog in the background if you hear that noise. The peripheral nervous system, this is everything outside the brain and the CNS, outside the brain and the spinal cord. This can be broken up into two sections, into a sensory section and a motor section. And remember here in biology, motor means movement, okay? So sensory and motor, those make up the peripheral nervous system. There, we can focus first on the sensory nervous system, and that can be divided into two pieces. There's a component of it that is associated with sensing the external environment. So this is like the information coming in through your eyes and through your sense of touch and through your ears. So um, this is the sort of the basic five senses that we're familiar with, and how they send information into your brain through the peripheral nervous system. But there's also a whole lot of information that your brain needs to keep track of from your internal environment. So for example, how fast is my heart beating? What is my blood pressure? Um, uh, um, what's the blood glucose level? Do I have enough sugar in my bloodstream? What's the pH of my blood? All that kind of stuff needs to be tracked, monitored. So you have sensors that keep track of your internal environment as well. And those are part of your peripheral nervous system in the sensory arm. All right. And then we have the second component, the other piece of the peripheral nervous system is the motor peripheral nervous system. So this is also broken down into two components. So we have what's called the somatic nervous system, and this is involved with voluntary movement. So motor means movement or muscles. Um, Voluntary control of muscles, and then an autonomic nervous system that is associated with involuntary uh, motor movements. So let's break that down a little bit more. The autonomic nervous system has two components: the parasympathetic, which is involved with slowing things down, and the sympathetic, which is associated with speeding things up. Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm going to move this onto another page so it's a little easier to see. Um, so our autonomic nervous system, this is the involuntary component of the peripheral nervous system. Like we said, parasympathetic or slowing down, sympathetic or speeding up. So our parasympathetic or slowing down, what do I mean when I say that? Well, that means this is associated with things like resting and digesting. All right. So this part of your peripheral nervous system is associated with, digesting your food and healing and getting rest and so on. That's your parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is associated with um, fight or flight. So, you see a tiger coming at you and you get that flush of adrenaline and you need to run away. That's your sympathetic nervous system um, helping you save your life. All right. So this diagram helps us understand a little bit about how these two compare. So we have the parasympathetic here and the sympathetic here. Um, and let's take a look at some of the things associated here. So Parasympathetic, that's your rest and digest components. So that's stimulating the flow of saliva, like you're chewing your food, slowing down the heartbeat, constricting the bronchi because you don't need so much oxygen. Um, you stimulate peristalsis. That's the muscle movements in your stomach that make it kind of churn and grind up the food that you've eaten. That's what peristalsis means here. And so you stimulate that. You stimulate secretion of digestion enzymes because remember, parasympathetic is about resting and digesting. All right, sympathetic is involved with fight or flight. So these actions should make sense in that regard. So we've got inhibiting the flow of saliva. You don't want to spend any time or energy, you know, generating a lot of saliva when you're running from a tiger. You need to speed up your heart rate. You need to open up the bronchi in your lungs so you can get lots of oxygen. You want to slow down things like peristalsis, like we mentioned over here, because you don't want to waste energy digesting food now. You want to save all your energy to run for your life, and so on. So that's how that we can sort of compare the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. All right, so the third component we're talking about today is a reflex arc. So the cells in our brain and in our peripheral nervous system need to detect and respond to changes in the internal and external environment to survive and maintain homeostasis. Remember we talked about this word homeostasis a little while ago. Homeo means same, and stasis means balance or stability. So homeostasis means maintaining a stable internal environment. And that's a really important thing that cells work hard to do. Um, and so they get information, incoming information to help them maintain their homeostasis. And we're going to take a quick look at that. So the first step in this reflex arc process is detection. So you have incoming signals either from the um, uh, external environment through the sensory portion of the peripheral nervous system. So, you see something coming, that's a detection, detecting signals from the outside. Or detecting a change of your internal environment, like your blood glucose level drops. Okay, so that's the detection step of the reflex arc. The second step of the reflex arc is integration. So in the brain, all these signals are coming in and from various places, and your brain needs to kind of link everything together and figure out what it means and that's what these kind of arrows are supposed to represent, and then figure out what to do in response to the variety of signals that have come in. So that's the integration step. And then there's a response step. So you have to do something with this information. How do you counteract the stimulus? So if your stimulus is, for example, the blood sugar level is too low, then your response would be to raise the blood sugar level. Okay, if your stimulus is a tiger that's coming towards you, your response is to run away. So the response counteracts or counterbalances whatever the stimulus is. I'll leave it to you to draw a picture to represent what we mean by response, because I couldn't come up with one. All right, to re-summarize that here, we've got our reflex arc, which is detection, integration, and response. Um, and that's how we build a reflex arc. Okay, so and to sort of summarize that graphically, we have sensor receptors detecting incoming signals, the brain integrating those signals and determining what the response should be, and then producing the response in an effector like a muscle cell. We have sensory input and motor output. Um, this part is your peripheral nervous system. This part is your central nervous system. And that is a summary of our reflex arc. All right, I hope that was helpful.